Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. Tonight we're going to start with our feature, Philip Roth, who died recently at the age of 85. A lot of people think he was the greatest American novelist of our generation. I don't know if that's true, but he was quite good. Many people thought he should have won the Nobel Prize in Literature, which he didn't. He got better reviews on his death than Tom Wolfe did on his. We just did the Tom Wolfe podcast. I'm not sure that's warranted, but those are all matters of taste. Philip Roth was a nice Jewish boy born in Newark, and he was born at the height of the Depression, and all that's germane because it plays into the themes of his novels. He wrote about being Jewish in America, the class system in America of suburban versus urban. He wrote about sex, he wrote about death, and later in life his novels were about politics, and he took some veiled shots at some of his bête noirs and paramours. Here are Julian Walker and Michael Carlson of the BBC4 Last Word on Philip Roth.
Philip Roth was one of the most celebrated American authors of the 20th century, and his work has been widely praised on Radio 4 this week. He wrote more than 30 novels about sex, death, art and politics, human weakness, and the experience of being Jewish in America. His early career saw him cast as an enfant terrible due to the sexually explicit content, be warned, of his fourth novel, Portnoy's Complaint. Decades later, he was the grand old man of American letters, and many couldn't understand why he hadn't been awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. The American cultural commentator Michael Carlson was a fan.
Philip Roth's literary career coincides nicely with my own adult reading life, and it was probably with adult reading in mind that sometime in 1969 I first grabbed Portnoy's Complaint, his first novel whose frankness about sex, especially masturbation, made it a huge bestseller. It was also funny, but as a teenage student of literature, I was not impressed. As the son of a Jewish mother myself, it may have cut a little close to the bone.
You want to hear how I learned to pee into the bowl like a big man? Just listen to this. I stand over the circle of water while with one hand my mama makes a trickle from the faucet, and with the other hand she tickles the underside of my cute little weenie. I guess she thinks that's how you get stuff to come out of the front of that thing. And let me tell you, Doctor, the lady is right.
Soon after, however, I saw the film Goodbye Columbus and went back to read Roth's 1959 novella, which inspired the movie. Again funny, but also a sharp-edged dissection not just of Jewish families, but of the American dream. It's about assimilation, snobbery, money, and its uses. About the class structure of education and value. It reflected Roth's own childhood in Newark's Jewish weequahic section, contrasting it with the ritzy suburb of Short Hills. And it's about love and sex. You didn't need a Jewish mother like mine to see how Neil Krugman and Brenda Potemkin's relationship was doomed.
I had no idea what I was doing when I wrote that book. I was 25. Therefore, I didn't know how to render a place. I didn't even know it was a good idea to do it. And so Newark doesn't exist in that book other than by gesture.
Roth left Newark to attend the WASPy, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Bucknell College. He went on to the University of Chicago and then became one of the first products of university writing programs. In 1973, Roth published the great American novel. It wasn't. Set in the world of baseball, it wasn't even the great baseball novel. But in its exuberance and self-conscious overkill, it was a parodic comment on the burden of what Norman Mailer called the great bitch on one's shoulder. That feeling that any American writer, to be great, had to write the book. Mailer battled the ghosts of Hemingway, Faulkner, Fitzgerald, but even he conceded Moby Dick was American writing's great white whale. Roth seemed to be saying he wouldn't bother to chase that whale, and Joe Heller had already written Catch-22. The material of his life and those he knew was grist for his mill. His unhappy first marriage to Margaret Martinson, her tragic death later in a car crash. He was a novelist, and his writing often subsumed other people's lives. In the 70s, he created a fictional alter ego, Nathan Zuckerman, and retreated into solipsism, taking his scalpel to writing itself. He never sought public acclaim like Mailer or Gore Vidal. He didn't deal in journalism. In The Counterlife in 1986, something changed. Roth took apart a story about Zuckerman, telling it from myriad angles. It freed him to unleash Sabbath's theater, a bravura celebration of all his own so-called faults. It won him his second National Book Award 35 years after Goodbye Columbus. He was 62. In the next 15 years, he published 11 consistently fine novels. When Fitzgerald said there were no second acts in American life, he could not have imagined this unprecedented run of autumnal success. The themes were familiar. His life was still his material. His turbulent marriage to the actress Claire Bloom led to her writing a memoir, which Roth answered with vitriol in I Married a Communist. But he was also looking outward. American Pastoral, his greatest novel, featured Swede Lvov. The Swede's success in pursuing the American dream gets ambushed by the 60s. I recognize Swede's daughter Mary as an alternate world version of Brenda Potemkin. I'd known women like her. To my great surprise and pleasure, in his late novels Indignation and The Humbling, he came full circle back to the America of Goodbye Columbus, as if it were unchanged. No writer prepared us so well for his passing.
And the great thing about dying is you don't have to worry about reviews anymore. So let them come, you know. I do know that I've worked as hard as I can, and I do know that I've done the best I can. That's the deal.
Roth said he'd like one last big idea, but he didn't need the great American novel as validation, nor a Nobel Prize after Bob Dylan pipped him. As he also said, he'd done the best he could with what he had. And that was great in itself.
I want to talk about a couple of things that you didn't see in many of the obits. The first is one of Philip Roth's first short stories before he was a widely known author, written in the mid-1950s, was a story called The Contest for Air and Gold, and it's quite good, and in fact it was adapted into an Alfred Hitchcock Presents in 1960. It starred as the main character, a young Sidney Pollack. About a middle-aged Jewish man who fled the Nazis and came to America and is forced to work at a boys' summer camp with the only hope of saving his business. He comes to associate with a young Jewish artistic boy at the camp, and it threatens his job and his future. Television adaptation had to play down the Jewish angle and the refugee angle, but otherwise fairly true to the story. And I must say, it's quite good television.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight's play is The Contest for Air and Gold. Bernie Samuelson.
Sir?
Bernie, boy, you're right on time. I just finished putting up the sign, and who should show up but Mr. Ceramics himself. How do you like it?
Fine, looks real nice. I'm sure I'll like it fine. You know, once upon a time, not so very long ago, there was no such thing as a neighborhood variety store or a hardware store where people could buy the things that they now take for granted.
That's Sidney Pollack. Before he became a director, he was quite a good actor. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is Goodbye Columbus. That was his 1959 book that essentially put him on the map. It won the 1960 National Book Award for Fiction. Now, I've never read Goodbye Columbus, and I have no reason to doubt that it's a great book. It's the book that everybody says it was. But I did see the 1969 movie with Richard Benjamin as the Philip Roth alter ego. And I will tell you, that is one of the more overrated movies that I've ever seen. The movie's sort of a knockoff of The Graduate. Like The Graduate, it doesn't age that well. Richard Benjamin is a plodding, uninteresting character. I think you lose a lot of the character studies of the other characters that are in the book. The plot is not all that interesting. And the worst part of it is, get this, the Jewish princess, the goddess that Richard Benjamin wants to sleep with, is played by none other than Ally McGraw. Now, I have to tell you, if you looked to find a worse actress to play a Jewish princess, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody worse than Ally McGraw. I mean, to begin with, she's not a great actress. But even worse than that, even with some Jewish blood on her mother's side, Ally McGraw is just about the living embodiment of Shiksa. I mean, remember, a year after this, she's in a love story playing a preppy Gentile girl. Philip Roth liked this movie, called it his favorite adaptation of his books, and I just don't get it, except for the fact that he did want to meet Ally McGraw, for whatever reason. There is one good thing about the movie, and that's the song, which is done by the Association, and they were coming to the end of their career by this point, but it is a great song, better than the movie. we don't have time to go into some of Philip Roth's late-in-life polemics or his nasty relationship with his one-time wife Claire Bloom. Suffice it to say, he was one of the great novelists of our generation. We're going to move on now to Clint Walker, who died recently at the age of 90, a couple days short of his 91st birthday, and he was one of the great cowboy stars of the television in the 1950s. Clint Walker was Cheyenne. In fact, let's do a little bit of that Cheyenne theme song.
Cheyenne, Cheyenne, where will you be camping tonight? Lonely man, Cheyenne, will your heart stay free at night? Cheyenne, Cheyenne.
Well, a couple of months back when I did the Robert Horton podcast, I caught some grief because I said I didn't think he was a great actor on Wagon Train. But I'll tell you something, I think he was better than Clint Walker. Clint Walker was a nice guy, but he wasn't much of an actor. But he was 6'6", and they were always finding ways to have him take his shirt off and show off his bare chest. They wanted a ruggedly handsome sort of a loner hero, and that's what he was. Ironically, for a little while, he left the show because of a contract dispute and was taken over for a brief time by Ty Hardin, whose podcast we've just done. Also not a great actor. But in truth, Clint Walker was better than Ty Hardin, and he was in the Ten Commandments before Cheyenne, and he later went on to do The Dirty Dozen and a couple other movies, but nothing really of note. He was part of that Warner Brothers staple in the late 50s when they were churning out television shows and westerns. Here, later in life, he talks about the legacy of Cheyenne.
I've got a stack of letters that high that are so nice, I just can't throw them away, that I get from people. And basically they're the kind of saying, when I was a kid, either my dad died or we got a divorce and I didn't have a dad, and you become the dad figure in my life. Or, like Cheyenne, I wanted to be like him when I grew up. And a lot of those letters, and a lot of them came from women who, just like Cheyenne, and liked the fact that he was good to the Indians and he championed the women and fought for the underdog and that kind of thing. The letters I'm getting now, these people are grandmothers and grandfathers, and they have grandchildren now that they want to see Cheyenne, because the shows had a moral to them, and they were clean. They were family fare. They were the kind of shows they could have the kids see, and they'd learn something from them, because they always had something of consequence to say. I guess the thing that I'm most proud of, as far as Cheyenne is concerned, is the positive effect that it seems to have had on so many lives. According to what people tell me and the letters I get, and when we do the shows, because they've been running the Cheyennes, there are long programs, and I am Cheyenne. I don't have to share that with anybody. So consequently, when I do the memorabilia shows, so far I have the longest lines of anybody.
I'll tell you one thing, Cheyenne's a far cry from Portnoy's complaint, but somehow I have a feeling some of those letters from women were not G-rated. But let's give Clint Walker his due. Not a great actor, but a good guy, and he embodied the values of Cheyenne. Someday somebody's going to do a good piece on the power of 50s television and westerns. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, and we're going to close tonight with Glenn Snoddy, who died recently at the age of 96. Glenn Snoddy was a good old boy from Tennessee, and he became a music engineer in the 40s at Nashville. He engineered sessions for Hank Williams and Johnny Cash and all those hillbilly cats. One of the guys he engineered sessions for was my man Marty Robbins. In 1960, Snoddy inadvertently discovered the fuzz pedal effect while working on a session for Robbins. In the middle of the song Don't Worry, Grady Martin's bass guitar started making a distorted sound because the transformer in the amplifier blew up. So Glenn Snoddy later constructed a guitar pedal that would replicate the fuzz tone, which would later become a crucial element in what is now known as the Nashville sound, and the effect became massively influential in rock music. So here's the 1961 record by Marty Robbins, which thanks to Glenn Snoddy and his discovery of the fuzz pedal became the basis for a lot of garage rock, punk rock, heavy metal, techno, and all sorts of sounds. This was the fuzz pedal.
Don't worry about me. sweet, sweet, sweet love.